Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a rigorous analysis of the empirical trends from the 2024 Sustainable Development Goals report. We're going to look closely at global progress, assessing both the macroeconomic overview and the specific status of the 17 global goals. Our main objective here? To cut through all the noise and give you a comprehensive, highly credible, data-driven look at exactly where the world stands on its 2030 promises. We're going to anchor our analysis right here, with this stark warning from UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. He stated that the report, quote, makes for sobering reading. You know, when the chief architect of the UN's global agenda sets this kind of tone right out of the gate, we absolutely must pay attention to the deep structural deficits he's implying. Because, well, here is the crucial point. A mere 17% of the SDG targets are currently on track. Just let that empirical fact sink in for a second. Only 17%. This single highly concerning figure really establishes our core thesis for this explainer. We are currently witnessing a systemic regression in our global development framework. To process all this dense data efficiently, we've structured this explainer into 6 macro themes. We'll start with the overall SDG progress assessment, move into challenges in human development, tackle education and gender disparities, examine environment, peace, and institutions, look at global partnerships and financing, and finally, chart the path to 2030. All right, Section 1. Overall SDG progress assessment, the macro trends. Let's examine the overarching progress and the unprecedented macroeconomic variables that have disrupted global development. So beyond that 17% that are actually on track, nearly half of all targets show only minimal or moderate progress. And even more alarmingly, over 1/3 have completely stalled or actively regressed. Now, you might be wondering, why exactly is this happening? Well, the data points clearly to the scarring effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, combined with escalating geopolitical conflicts and climate chaos. These aren't just isolated events, right? They interact to create a massive, compounding, systemic global crisis. Moving on to Section 2. Challenges in human development, poverty, hunger, and health. Here, we'll examine the severe headwinds facing our most fundamental pillars of human development. Let's look at Goal 1, no poverty. It faces some truly massive gaps. Just look at the stark disparity across country income levels here. Despite our global commitments to expanding social safety nets, a staggering 1.4 billion children remained entirely without social protection cash benefits in 2023. If these current trends persist, researchers project that roughly 590 million people could still be trapped in extreme poverty by the year 2030. That's a huge structural deficit. And you see, this economic strain spills directly over into Goal 2, zero hunger. We're seeing the massive effects of disrupted supply chains and economic crises, leaving almost 60% of countries facing moderately to abnormally high food prices. The human toll of this is profound. Right now, 733 million people are facing hunger, and an astonishing 2.33 billion are experiencing moderate to severe food insecurity. Now, at first glance, Goal 3 might actually look promising. Total official development assistance to medical research surged dramatically in 2020 and 2021. But let's look a little closer at the color coding. That massive spike? It's almost entirely COVID-19 control assistance. And what that does is it actually masks an underlying stagnation in fundamental medical research and basic health sector funding. This is a critical vulnerability, especially when we consider that 35 million children will not live to see their 5th birthday by 2030 if we don't drastically accelerate health interventions. Section 3. Education and gender disparities. Structural inequalities. Let's dissect the persistent structural inequalities deeply embedded within these sectors. For Goal 4, quality education, the data is, frankly, highly concerning. Currently, only 58% of students achieve minimum reading proficiency, and recent assessments show a significant global decline in both math and reading scores. We're battling systemic teacher shortages and incredibly inadequate infrastructure. But you know what the most staggering metric is? To catch up and hit our 2030 targets, the world would have to orchestrate the astonishing logistical feat of admitting a new child to school literally every 2 seconds. So the crucial takeaway regarding Goal 5, gender equality, is the absolute glacial pace of systemic change. When we look at the structural realities, harmful practices persist. 1 in 5 girls still marry before age 18, and a staggering 230 million women and girls have been subjected to female genital mutilation. In daily life, women spend 2.5 times more hours on unpaid domestic work than men. But most telling of all, at our current rate of progress, achieving gender parity in management positions will require another 176 years. We are practically centuries away from true structural equity. On to Section 4, Environment, Peace, and Institutions, Systemic Destabilizers. We now shift our focus to the macro, environmental, and institutional factors that really act as foundational prerequisites for all the other development goals. These visualizations completely expose our ecological fragility. On one side, the Red List Index of Species Survival shows incredibly worrying downward trends, which indicates severe biodiversity loss across multiple global regions. On the other side, we see the rapid degradation of mountain ecosystems. What these metrics show us is that the very environmental baseline upon which our economies and our food systems rely is actively eroding. On the institutional front, looking at Goal 16, the data reflects immense human suffering. By May 2024, the world documented an unprecedented 120 million forcibly displaced individuals. And alongside this displacement, there was a shocking 72% surge in civilian conflict casualties in just the year 2023 alone. As the report makes abundantly clear, you simply cannot build sustainable, long-term development on a foundation of systemic violence and instability. This brings us to Section 5, Global Partnerships and Financing, the Architectural Enablers. To understand how to potentially rescue these goals, we have to critically analyze the structural architecture of global financing and partnerships. This analysis reveals the immense fiscal pressure developing nations are facing. Just look at the steep upward climb of total debt service and interest payments for IDA-eligible countries over the last decade. When nations are forced to allocate such massive amounts of capital simply to service external debt, it fundamentally constrains their domestic budgets. It literally starves essential services like health and education of the financing they so desperately need. And comparing regional investments reveals even deeper structural imbalances. Take the Agriculture Orientation Index, for example. This is a key indicator of government investment in agriculture relative to its contribution to the economy. Eastern and Southeastern Asia shows a robust index of 0.83, but in stark contrast, Sub-Saharan Africa lags significantly at just 0.12. This disparity directly undermines the resilience of local food systems in the exact places where they're needed the most. We also see a stark technological dichotomy. Yes, internet access has rapidly expanded globally, which you can see indicated by the shift from the light to dark dots. But a very deep digital divide still exists, particularly in lower-income regions. In our modern global economy, digital access is a foundational architectural enabler. Lacking it severely hampers equitable development and access to crucial knowledge. Finally, Section 6, the path to 2030, mobilizing the final phase. Let's look at the systemic requirements and upcoming milestones needed to correct this highly problematic trajectory. Looking at this specific cross-section of targets really reminds us of the vast, interconnected scope of the agenda we have to tackle simultaneously. You cannot fix international poverty without also addressing universal health coverage, equal access to education, or safe drinking water. They are fundamentally linked and they absolutely demand a coordinated global policy response. This timeline traces our crucial, rapidly narrowing window for structural interventions, moving from the SDG Summit commitments in late 2023 through the incredibly sobering metrics of 2024. We are now looking toward the critical 2025 World Social Summit and Financing for Development Conference. Every single point on this timeline represents an expiring opportunity to mobilize resources before that ultimate 2030 deadline arrives. So we leave you with this final, provocative question to consider as you reflect on the empirical, academic data presented in this explainer. With only 6 years remaining and facing a massive structural deficit, will the global community successfully mobilize to rescue the 2030 promise? The structural deficits are profound, for sure, but the milestones for intervention are directly ahead of us. What you should take away from this is that awareness is the very first step toward actual mobilization. Thank you so much for learning with me today, and keep questioning the data.